As most of you know already, Michigan Atheists is the oldest local atheist group in America. We remember really well the 70s, the 80s, the 90s with Michigan Atheists. When we were really the only act in town, there was nothing else. And we've always been a statewide organization. And so as we now are watching the explosion of the secular community in Michigan, this is a real breath of fresh air for us, and something that we've only seen for at least slightly over the past decade. We've watched dozens of blogs, the formation of at least 50 secular groups, most of which are located here in Southeast Michigan, and secular socials of every nature imaginable, billboards, lawsuits, and friendships, the friendships. Now, throughout all these years, Michigan Atheists has played a major role in trying to help any group that wants to get started. We don't care what your mission statement is, what you call yourself. If you're secular, we want to do whatever we can do to help you. Last year, our convention theme was to celebrate the secular community because we're so proud of the growth of the secular community in Michigan. We know that something is missing. We know something's missing in our secular community, not only in Michigan, but nationwide. And I know that we all know exactly what that something is. And so that something is the theme for our convention this year, which is unity today, power tomorrow. Somehow or other, we, the secular community, must strive to flex our political muscle by seeking out candidates who embrace our agenda, which of course is to defend the secular document by which we are governed. That would be our Constitution. And I know you already all know this, but it bears mentioning because I'm not sure that anybody else knows this about our secular Constitution. You see, it makes no mention of a God in our Constitution, or of religion, or of Christianity, other than exclusionary, such as no religious test shall ever be required as a qualification for any office or public trust. Does that sound like this is what's going on in America? This is like, when did that get in the Constitution? And then, how about Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibition of the free exercise thereof. Those are the very first words of our Bill of Rights. Something is going wrong here, and we need to fix it. And there is no doubt that the fix is going to have some creative and pioneering ideas. We can't just keep doing what we've been doing because it isn't working. And it's never easy to make change. But if we really are serious about wanting to flex our political muscle, we're going to have to get some new information. We're going to have to take some chances and pioneer some new avenues. And we have Ellen Johnson to speak to us today, and she's going to give us some guidelines. She's going to help us through this somewhat. Now, beyond that, we also need to support the secular organizations in America that are specifically involved in dozens of lawsuits every single year in our courts of law. And we need to throw our support their way. Specifically, I'm talking about Americans United for Separation of State and Church. I'm also talking about Freedom from Religious Religion Foundation. What these folks are doing, and they're really the only two organizations in America that are aggressively trying to solve our issues in the courts. And we know that that's a horrible battle. And while I'm speaking of this, it brings me to an interesting, though disgusting, a very disgusting issue in Warren, Michigan. It seems as though Warren's mayor, James Flouts, in his zeal to block a reason station alongside the existing prayer station in City Hall, he decided to compare the Freedom of Religion Foundation to the American Nazi Party and the Ku Klux Klan. Bad move, Mayor Flouts, because now all the really big guns are coming to Michigan to challenge his bitter prejudice in a court of law. This is going to be fun. We've already attended one hearing a couple of weeks ago. I don't think anything is scheduled to February, but find out where we are and what we're doing, because this is going to get interesting. And the most important thing I want to say about this case is that this case probably more closely represents unity today, power tomorrow, than anything else, any example I have right now. Because, to my knowledge, this case is the first of its nature to have co-counsel equally represented by Freedom from Religion Foundation, Americans United for Separation of State and Church, the ACLU of Michigan, and the ACLU nationally, and then a private law firm. The case is called Douglas Marshall versus Warren City et al. And so the plaintiff, Douglas Marshall, now has teams of attorneys representing the best legal minds in the country in terms of constitutional law. How about that? Where are you, Doug? We were there for the hearing a couple of weeks ago. There was absolutely nobody in the courtroom from the city of Warren. Not the mayor, not anybody that worked there, not anybody that lived there. There was nobody there. We're going to start this morning with Rob Boston. And Rob, I've known Rob for over 20 years. I have always felt that Rob is one of the nicest guys I've ever known, and a happy guy. And that might be because for 28 years he's worked for Americans United. He's their director of communications. And he's also the editor of their amazing Church and State magazine. How many of you get the Church and State magazine? Well, Rob Boston is the editor of that. And I was speaking with him last night, and I said, you know, you're obviously a happy man, and you've been able to do the work that you love so dearly and get paid for it. What's not to love? Rob has authored a number of books, but when he came out with this new book, Michigan Atheist bought 30 copies, and we started distributing them because we see his new book, Taking Liberties, Why Religious Freedom Doesn't Give You the Right to Tell Other People What to Do. There's the book, if I can hold it up right. Rob is going to discuss with us today what the ideal secular society covering government endorsement of religion, the role of religion in public education, the LGBT rights, taxpayer support for religious projects, and how to define religious freedom claims in a multi-faith, multi-philosophy society. That's a tall order, and he's up to it. Rob Buston.
Thank you. Well, thank you. Good morning. It's a pleasure to be here with you today. I had the pleasure a couple of weeks ago of attending a performance of Julius Caesar at the Folger Shakespeare Theater in Washington, D.C. Some of you may remember Mark Antony's famous line from that play, "I came to bury Caesar, not to praise him." But then, you know, he kind of goes on and he actually does praise him a little bit. Well, I didn't come to bury anything today. I came simply to praise. And I came to praise separation of church and state. I came to praise the secular state. But I also came to praise you and to thank you for the work that you do, defending those important principles. The time you give, the money you give, which makes it possible for organizations like my own, and Freedom from Religion Foundation, and the ACLU, and the Secular Coalition, and the Secular Student Alliance, and so many others to do this important work, because we could not do it without you. And I wanted to talk a little bit this morning about a question that has been kind of thrown at me over the years, in one form or another. Sometimes I've heard it on Fox News if I'm appearing on a program there. Sometimes I've heard it on conservative talk radio. And the question is something like this. What do you people want? And you know, they always say it like that. You people, like we're some separate species. What do you people want? And as I thought about that question, I thought, well, you know, it's quite possible for us to answer that question. Quite possible for us to ponder that and to lay out a number of things that explain what we people want. And I wanted this morning to talk a little bit about that with you. Talk about what we would like to see in our society, what we'd like to change, what we think is working now, what maybe needing a little tweak here and there. The first thing I want is for religious people to acknowledge their privilege and how good they have it in this country. I am so tired of hearing about the war on Christmas, the war on Christianity, the persecution that these organizations say that they are undergoing in this country. Persecution? Look at the situation they have. Let me give you a couple of examples. First of all, religious organizations in the United States are tax exempt by mere dint of their existence. Nobody checks up on it, no paperwork to fill out, no forms, no hoops to jump through at the IRS. Now, if we wanted to get together in this organization today and we wanted to form a group to, you know, save the environment or address an issue like that, we would have to apply for tax exempt status. We would have to make the case that we deserved it, and we could be denied it if we did not make that case. That is not the situation with a house of worship. As soon as it pulls together, as soon as it forms, it is tax exempt, end of discussion. So that's a privilege, that's a benefit that they get. They are exempt from all the rules of the IRS regarding oversight. My organization, Americans United for Separation of Church and State, Dan's organization, Freedom from Religion Foundation, other organizations out there, we have to file detailed reports every year with the IRS about our finances. It's called a Form 990. And you know what? That is actually a good thing. That helps you, the donor, look at our finances, see how we're spending our money, get an idea if we're being good stewards of your contributions. So I'm not opposed to that. But again, the houses of worship, they have to do none of that. Have you ever looked at these situations on television? You'll see some TV preacher with 15 mansions, flying around the country in jets, going on vacations every year, taking in millions of dollars tax-free, and you think to yourself, how does that happen in this country? Well, it happens because there is no oversight of those ministries. They are absolutely free from that. They don't have to fill any reporting requirements at all. Sometimes people ask me, how much money do religious organizations in the United States have? How much property do they have? How much money? How much, you know, what are they worth? And no, I don't know. Nobody knows. I mean, people can guess. We can try to estimate. But the reason nobody knows is they aren't required to tell anybody. So again, that isn't exactly persecution. Lobbying. Consider their situation with lobbying. Again, my organization, Freedom from Religion, lots of other groups. If we choose to lobby on Capitol Hill in Washington, D.C., there are very strict rules about the type of lobbying we can do. We're limited to a certain percent. If we exceed that by even 1%, the IRS is going to come after us. The government's going to come after us. They'll fine us. What about churches? What about houses of worship? They're completely exempt. They don't have to meet any of those regulations. Again, sometimes people will say to me, well, how much is the Catholic Church spending on lobbying? How much are the Mormons spending on lobbying? How much are the Baptists spending on lobbying? Beats me. They aren't required to tell anybody because of their privileged status in the United States. The New York Times did a story a couple years ago, and they found the following. Between the years 1989 to 2006, this is a direct quote, more than 200 special arrangements, protections, or exemptions for religious groups or their adherents were tucked into congressional legislation. This covered things like pension plans, immigration issues, and land use. All those special exemptions for religion. Yet we're told that religion is being persecuted. Think about a situation you might have read about in the media a couple weeks ago. There were some pastors in Houston that were subpoenaed because it looked like they had been involved in some political issues in that city, and they went crazy. Now, there's nothing in the law that prevents a pastor or a church from being subpoenaed, but they raised such a fuss about it that the subpoenas were at first modified, then entirely withdrawn. So they are not accountable in that regard. Yet they say they're persecuted. So that's the first thing they need to do. Acknowledge their privileged status and be thankful for it. They're doing very well in this country. The next thing I'd like to see is for these organizations to understand that persuasion must be their primary vehicle, not force. Persuasion. And I say that because right now in this country, we're in a situation where I think a lot of the more conservative religious organizations have failed to persuade us. So they are instead attempting to rely on the force of government to get us to live our lives the way they would like us to live them. And think about this for a minute, especially with some of the issues relating to birth control access that have been going on in this country. And isn't it amazing? In 2014, we are still grappling with this issue of whether adults should be able to get access to birth control. You know, we thought we had nailed this down. There's an old case from the Supreme Court in the 1960s called Griswold v. Connecticut, which the Supreme Court upheld the right of adults to access birth control, striking down state laws that had restricted its access even for married couples. That was the power of the churches back in those days. They could actually get laws like that passed. Well, the Supreme Court did strike that down. Yet here we are now with secular organizations, for-profit businesses, huge, sprawling enterprises saying, we're not going to pay for birth control in a health care plan because it offends our president. It offends the president of our corporation. Hobby Lobby is an example of that. You probably have read about that case. Well, you know what I wonder is, some of these organizations are religious in nature. Why aren't they making a better argument? If they're so concerned about birth control, if they're so concerned about religion, if they're so concerned about people living their lives the way they'd like to see them live their lives, why don't they make a better argument, persuade people to do these things? Well, their arguments have failed. So now they're relying on force. And why have their arguments failed? Well, because I've observed their arguments, and they're not very good arguments. And I've been following the religious right for 26 years now, have managed to remain out of therapy during all those years, although I've considered it. Been to their meetings, looked at their websites, get their emails, look at their magazines, and I'll tell you what I have seen. I have seen fear, I have seen division, I have seen conspiracy theories, and I have seen hatred of the other. And the other may be gays and lesbians, the other may be atheists, the other may be secular humanists, it may be agnostics, whatever enemy du jour they have decided to conjure up. That is what they're offering people. That type of division, that type of fear. And then they wonder why so many people recoil, because it isn't a good product. And they know they're losing some of these issues. They know they're losing on marriage equality. They know they're losing on other issues. But instead of simply adjusting to that new reality, they continue to try to force us to live under their religion's rules. And they need to stop that. The next thing they need to understand is that in this country, anyone is free to reject modern science if you want. I don't recommend it. But you're free to do it. However, you are not free to impose that on the rest of us. And by this I mean things like evolution, obviously, the ongoing battles we're facing in a number of states around the country where people are trying to remove that instruction from the public school system. But I would also add a couple of other issues. History. You may not be aware of this, but we're fighting and we're really in a struggle right now to protect our history. Arlene talked about those phrases from our very own Constitution. Article 6, declaring there shall be no religious test for public office. The First Amendment's declaration that Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. That great legacy of separation of church and state and freedom of conscience given to us by men like Roger Williams, James Madison, Thomas Jefferson, John Leland, George Washington. They want to rewrite that history. They want to take that away. They want to erase that. And they're trying to do that in Texas. In Texas, according to a bunch of new textbooks that have been adopted for use, Moses was really the most important founding father. It's disgraceful. We have to be fighting that. And also, higher criticism of the Bible. Again, they want to argue, they want to behave as if their religious beliefs should somehow be beyond critical scrutiny, simply because they are religious beliefs. That isn't the way it works in this country. You know, all of our ideas, all of our concepts are open to public debate. Everything we believe about God, everything we believe about religion, everything we believe about the Bible, we are willing to debate it, we are willing to discuss it. There are people in this room who have done this publicly, who have debated ministers, who have debated others. I've been on television, I've done these things, other folks have done it. We are willing to have that debate. Yet they seem sometimes to think that because we're talking about religion, it should be beyond discussion. Well, again, not the way it works in this country. The next thing we need them to understand is that our public schools are truly that. They're public. They're for everybody. They are not any group's mission field. Now, this has been an ongoing struggle for a long time in this nation. We have a system that we have built up that serves 90% of our young people. 90%. So the vast majority of our young people are attending public schools. And that's why these religious right organizations are so determined to get in there and try to convert those children. They also need to stop lying about the role of religion in public schools. I am tired of these lies. There is absolutely no prohibition on the discussion of religion in our public school system, if it is done objectively and fairly with sound academic goals in mind. I mean, how could you teach the history of the world? How could you teach American history without discussing the role of religion? And of course, you must discuss the good as well as the bad. When you're discussing literature, when you're discussing art, you are naturally going to be talking about the influence religion has had. You know, there are just so many works of literature that include these references. We don't want our students to be ignorant. Nobody in this room wants that. But what we want is a fair, objective discussion of these issues, not proselytism, not dogma. That belongs in church and in Sunday school. It's also a lie that students can't engage in prayer and other forms of voluntary religion in public education. They can. Students can pray anytime they want during the day, as long as they're not compelling or forcing it onto anyone else. Teachers can't lead prayers. That's not their job. But if a student wants to say a prayer before lunch or before they take a test, or if a student wants to meet with his or her peers in a club after hours and they want to be religious, they have that right. There's a law called the Equal Access Act, and it gives every student the right to form a Christian club, a Jewish club, a Buddhist club, a Muslim club, and yes, an atheist club. You can form all these clubs. They're student-run. Nobody has to be there. It's completely voluntary. So the lie is that there is no religion in our public schools. There is, but it's voluntary, not compelled. It used to be compelled. Some of you may remember before the Supreme Court rulings in 1962 and 1963 what that was like. We did away with that, and good riddance to it. Now it's voluntary. And it has to be that way because essentially this is a matter of parental rights. Parents get to decide what religion, if any, a student is exposed to. Not a public school teacher, not a public school bureaucrat. The next thing I'd like to see, and the next goal I think we'd like to shoot for in this country, is for religion to pay for all of its own projects. Now, there was a time in this country when that was completely non-controversial. The religious organizations said, yes, of course we pay for our own stuff. We're proud of that fact. We built our church from the ground up, and we built it with the support of the people who believed in that church. Well, that used to be the way it was. But now we're living in an era of faith-based initiatives and taxpayer aid to religion and support for these types of projects. And everything has changed. Religious schools are demanding and receiving public support in many states. Dan can tell you about that because Wisconsin is one of them, and there are a number of other states as well. through these voucher plans, we taxpayers are supporting a variety of religious schools, including Roman Catholic institutions that teach their doctrine, Christian fundamentalist schools that don't teach evolution, that teach all manner of fake history and theology, Muslim schools, Jewish schools, and it goes down the line. These are now being supported with your tax dollars. It used to be the religious organizations wanted to pay for those things themselves. Well, now they're tapping into the public fisc, and it's a problem. Now, on those occasions where religious organizations decide, for whatever reason, that they want to take some taxpayer money, say to open a soup kitchen or to open a homeless shelter, there are certain things that they have to do, or should have to do. Number one, they should have to serve everybody. They shouldn't be able to say, well, we're Baptists, so we're only going to help the Baptist homeless. Not with taxpayer money, you're not. They can't discriminate. They shouldn't be allowed to discriminate on hiring. They shouldn't be allowed to say, we're only going to hire Baptists at our soup kitchen. No, with taxpayer money, you're not. And no proselytizing. If they want to proselytize, if they want to force people to watch a Jesus video before they give them their soup or their cot for the night, let them pay for that with their own money. No taxpayer money. But they're fighting that. They're pushing back and they're saying, well, you're trying to strip away our religious identity. And to that I say, nobody is making you take the government money. When you take the government money, you meet a list of regulations. My wife works for what we call Beltway Bandit in Washington, D.C. It's a huge contracting firm. They handle contracts for the federal departments. The contract she is on is connected to the U.S. Department of Education. And you better believe every dime of that money is accounted for. There is huge oversight. If they don't meet the requirements of the contract, they won't get any more money. It's watched very closely. Again, why would we not want to do the same with religious organizations? If they are accepting government money and they are accepting contracts, let them meet all the rules and regulations that the secular groups are meeting. It's not too much to ask. The next thing we want religious organizations to maintain, display, and erect their symbols on their own time with their own dime. Now again, this has been a little bit of a problem for us lately. We have crosses, in one case in California, a 43-foot tall Christian cross on top of a mountain outside of San Diego that is called a war memorial. That is not a war memorial. A 43-foot tall Christian cross does not memorialize non-Christian veterans.